Welcome everybody, welcome to another exciting episode of Bo P Talk. My name is Robert and with me is
Peter.
Hot off the hills. Today we are looking at the big beautiful bill. We're going to be talking a lot about finance, we're going to be talking a lot about economy. This is an area that our listeners have been urging us to continue in this space. We had a lot of queries about new generations coming through, younger people I'm implying. What do we call those younger people, Peter? We call them do we call them alphas? What are they now being called, the new generation?
The new ones, technically speaking, if you're born this year, I think it's the first year of Generation Beta.
Beta, alpha generation beta.
Yeah. So, and then if you're born somewhere in the 2010s till now, it's Alpha. And then before that was Gen Z.
Okay, there you go. So if you're 20 years old, you'd be considered a Gen Z. There
Yes.
you go. So they're the ones we're really thinking about, aren't we? When I was
Yeah.
saying that before, because they're the ones that are going to feel a lot of, we spoke about our last episode, the pinch in terms of some of our superannuation rules in Australia. But we're going to the US, the good old US now, to look at the big, beautiful bill. Now, I'm going to start with the ABC News. They're not quite a fan of good old Donald Trump. I love the picture they have on their article here. They have Donald Trump doing the classic YMCA dance move and his red tie and Make America Great Again hat. Anyway, let's get to it. What do they talk about? They talk about three areas, and we might dig a little bit further from what we've read about this big, beautiful bill. There are a lot of people that are criticising it, may I say, and there are some that are dancing in the streets. So let's unpack it. All right, the first thing. Obviously, they're going to mention about illegal workers. This isn't new. This has been the rhetoric since Trump was elected. Now there's more talk about stripping that hope away in terms of the rhetoric from this ABC News article. Now, for those that are interested, it's written by Brad Ryan in Washington, D.C. This is Friday the 4th of July. It was released. The article was worded, Donald Trump just won the fight to remake America in three big ways. So the first one, obviously, talking about this, as I said, stripping away the rights of illegal workers. So in other words, the incentives, I'm quoting here, to come here are being removed, and people here without legal status are being encouraged to self-deport or risk harsh consequences. The bill will inject more than $100 billion to hire enforcement agents. I'm still reading word for word. I just jumped ahead a little bit in the article. Continue work on the Mexican border wall and double the size of the detention facilities. There's a lot more there, but I'll go to the next one. And this is considered a big loser in terms of the environment by those that are against this bill. For environmentalists, the final version of the bill isn't quite as bad as it could have been. However, Trump is no fan of renewable energy in terms of what he says in this article. Particularly looking at it, it's, I think, all about drill, baby, drill. The bill will make it easier to lease public land for drilling and mining and cut the royalties oil and gas producers pay the government. So there is a little bit more to it. I'll go to the last one, and this is the point that ABC News talks about, widening the gap between haves and have-nots. And in terms of it, obviously a lot is focused on Medicaid. Don't confuse it with Medicare, as we call it in Australia, Medicaid, the government program that provides health insurance, particularly for low-income Americans. Are workers in low-paying service jobs who rely on tips. Oh, this is another in terms of tax exemption also within this it talks about. So I'll just read this bit actually. Workers who rely on tips to make a living will appreciate that tips are now exempt from tax. For those with less, the US already lacks the welfare benefits of places like Australia. This is what it says in the article, where things like Medicare and Centrelink are sometimes taken for granted in Australia. Millions of Americans are also expected to lose the help of the National Food Stamp Program that helps keep poorer people fed. So the Congress Budget Office estimates about 12 million Americans will lose their health coverage. Going back to this Medicaid, I did jump around a bit on this one in terms of widening the gap, if we're going to use that analogy. Peter, I've spoken a lot there. I've tried to summate bits and pieces of this big, beautiful bill. It's a big bill, so there's a lot to say. What's your spin or take on it, Peter?
Looking at how the bill is put together, it looks like the US is trying to remove some of its unfunded liabilities.
Okay, yeah, that's interesting. So, what do you imply when you mean funded? So we can explain to our listeners
Okay, so
liabilities.
liabilities is anything that the government has to pay for. So a good example,
Yes.
Medicaid, Social Security,
Okay.
infrastructure, health, what else? The military expenditures. Basically anything that like the government has to pay for. And like looking at the numbers, I think there's about a $1 trillion worth of savings
Okay.
in some of the social security side of things. So when you look at Medicaid, which you mentioned, um, and other social welfare programs which are looking to be cut, it works out to be about $1 trillion.
Wow, that's a fair bit, and we have to keep in mind that America is in major debt,
Yes.
aren't they? Like a lot of countries out there that seem to kind of ignore it in a certain way, if that's the way to put it. But it's certainly something they're looking at, obviously getting themselves a bit of surplus happening, per year. That is when I say, in terms of per year. Claims that, in fact, the White House claims the savings. You said 1.7 trillion. Is
One
that
one
correct?
trillion,
Over
sorry,
10
1 trillion.
years? Well, they're saying here the OBBA claims 1.7 trillion in mandatory savings over 10 years, which they assert is the highest level mandatory savings in US history.
Yeah.
And yeah, there you go. And obviously, they argue that when you combine this with other Trump admin policies, like the increased tariff revenues and discretionary spending cuts, the total deficit reduction could exceed 6.6 over 10 years. That's the whole cumulative aspect, if I explained that well enough.
Yes.
That's a fair bit of saving,
It
isn't
is.
it? Could be a legacy if it's truly going to work, this model. Do you see it working, what they're
Well,
doing?
it's coming to a point where something has to be done to kind of steer the ship back into a positive. Don't get me wrong, like, in terms of the debt's going to be around for some time, but the deficit definitely needs to be removed from the government expenditure, and they need to get back into the black, so to speak, because you can't keep borrowing forever.
Because obviously they're focusing in these areas in terms of government expenditure, the Medicaid, which I mentioned before, the food stamp program, and also green energy rollbacks. So obviously that's where you're getting the elimination in terms of the green energy rollbacks of or reduction of tax credits and programs for renewable energy and electric vehicles. And that's, I think, if we want to just briefly touch on, we can't avoid the man, Trump, that is, as much as we try. He's not having a good time with Elon Musk. I assume it's all about that, isn't it? The current situation because of the reduced funding, if you want to put it, or programs attached to his Tesla electric vehicles.
Yeah, definitely, definitely. Even looking at some of the numbers, even you got the
Yeah.
new US national debt, looking at 37 trillion.
Okay.
Now
All right. So that's the number.
that's the
That's
number.
the
That's
number.
something I didn't want to kind of butt in uh, as
No,
you're
I'm glad you
speaking.
did. I
Yeah,
was thinking
so
that. That's good.
that's where it's at.
Yeah.
It's continuously ticking up, obviously. Now,
Yeah.
U.S. federal tax revenue is about $5 trillion. That's how much they expect to earn each year. Um,
Yeah.
they're interesting figures. So US, so when you look at all the debts, right? So this is something that they don't actually talk about all that much. Now that also includes household debts, so from
Yeah.
essentially everyone from the US, it's actually sitting at about 100 billion or 100, close to 105 billion, sorry, trillion dollars. Yeah.
So really, it is a generational movement towards if they did want to alleviate or remove the deficit.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, realistically, it works out to be roughly like, and this is the $37 trillion. That's about $2,000 per adult, right? So you think about it, it's not that much, but that's it's still quite considerable. But everything that I guess this bill is doing is making that debt, I guess, try to reduce as much as they can, or try to get into that, I guess, positive area. But on the flip side, you need people to back it, and you can't continue to, I guess, take away from, say, your higher ups in terms of corporations and mining companies and stuff, and expect them to continue to use the resources that you have on the land. So part of the whole rationale is, okay, we'll get more mining to start in the US, and then once we get to a place where we're happier, we can then maybe tax them a little bit more. But it's the incentive now to kind of come in and start using some of what is available there.
Now, in terms of what I touched about Tesla and the tiff with
Mm.
Elon Musk, because that's one of the losers in all of this. Some are arguing the environment, but not as bad as they thought. But I'm keeping an eye on, if we look at finances, the Tesla shares. I don't know if you've kept an eye on that, Peter, but again, they dropped today, not much. But if you look over 5 days, about 2.79%. If you go 6 months, you start looking at 23.28%. They're not having a good time. Obviously, when in doubt, zoom out. They obviously, if you invested in them back in, to give listeners a bit of a go, if you invested back in 2017, January the 6th, you would have paid $15.27 for a Tesla share, which now sits on about 315.35. So you're still way in front if you invested in the early days. But looking at the year to date, 16% or 16 minus 16.86% drop is significant when you consider today Nvidia has gone up another 1.33%, Apple 0.52%, and okay, your other stocks overall had a fairly good day, a fairly plain, ordinary, boring day. Overall, the Dow Jones Industrial Average is sitting on 0.77% growth today. And zooming out slightly over the month, gone up 5.93%. For the year to date, don't forget, listeners, we're sitting on 5.75%. Considering you had a drop, don't forget, listeners, back in April when the tariffs were being thrown or bashed around. So here's a question for you, very speculative. I know I'm throwing you in the deep end here, Peter. What do you see in terms of the future for Tesla and Tesla shares?
Yeah, it's very hard to call. The reason why I say that is, there's still obviously the popularity that, I guess electrification and renewable energy. While the government of today might not be behind or backing that, the government of tomorrow probably will. So I would say it will be bouncing around depending on the status quo of the government. So the next government that could be sworn in might be a government that
You'll be a big
favors
fan.
electrification, and you're going to see a massive boom. It could also be done on purpose, so the right people invest into Tesla and other EV companies, I should say battery companies, that while it's down, and then they know that in the future it's going to go up, and they can make a large windfall. And again, that's all speculatory type of things that I'm trying to say.
Yeah, that's decent to consider because we're talking about here out there 3 days ago in the news. Tesla did bounce back slightly in Norway and Spain in terms of their sales because the EV market is surging across Europe at the moment. Although, in the same token, a month ago, UK sales of new Tesla cars had slumped by more than a third. It's the Musk backlash and factor that's at play. Where does he sit in terms of continuing to be, I guess, the face of Tesla? Could that be part of the problem or
Oh,
solution?
well, look, I wouldn't call Musk the face of Tesla. He hasn't been, yeah, I mean, like, while he's present in Tesla, I wouldn't call him the face. Um, I guess people are slowly starting to see, while they weren't necessarily agreeing with what he did in the US while a part of Doge. But at the end of the day, he's just a person. He does, like, he who has a large investment in Tesla. He's going to try and push his, I guess, stake that he has to be as high as possible. So he'll only be doing in what's in his best interest, which is to make Tesla a better performing company. So he'll move himself around depending on what he needs to do.
Yeah, because it's quite interesting. If you look at Bloomberg, what they're saying, they're claiming the Tesla problems at the moment. It's not just an Elon Musk backlash, because remember the whole front and center being a part of the Doge and some of the backlash they faced. It's more than that, and that's what Bloomberg is saying. Obviously, a lot centers around its popular model, the Model Y, and its facelift. It's lacking a new, more affordable car to obviously revitalise that lineup. But obviously, we're thinking about obviously relative to, of course, the Chinese BYD. That seems to be growing and taking a bit of the market as well.
Yeah, and especially when you look at the the market here. The Tesla's an over $60,000 car. Not
Mm.
everyone has the buying power here in Australia to buy a $60,000 vehicle, and one that probably has maximum 10 years worth of life based on its battery. People rather go for something that's tried and true, especially during this trying times that we're in, over something that they know little to nothing about.
Because the BYD is considerably cheaper, isn't
I
it?
wouldn't say it's considerably cheaper, but it is cheaper. The BYD EVs are almost on parity to a petrol car, which is reasonable.
Yeah, yeah. Because the BYD Dolphin Essential Australian dollars, of course, is priced at 32,138.45 drive away, while the premium version is about 39,000, to give a bit of an idea in terms of what you are comparing. Obviously, as you look at the other models, it starts to get towards that 60,000 echelon that we're comparing to, and it does seem to be people are enjoying that idea of, correct me if I'm wrong, you order it online, Peter. That sounds like an exciting way of getting it.
Well, yeah, and I think in Australia there's like one or two, or I should say New South Wales, there's one or two BYD dealerships, like actual physical dealerships.
Okay,
And
okay,
surprisingly
yeah.
enough, now that you said ordering online, with most car companies now, you can order online, and what it does is sends your order to your local dealership, so that the one that's closest to you, and then they process the order for you.
Now Tesla also is not just cars, is it? There's a little bit more to Tesla than meets the eyes.
Yes.
There's solar panels, solar roof, power walls, mega packs, you name it, they have it. The obviously the Tesla EV chargers you see around the
Yeah,
place as well. So there's a lot more to the Tesla company, isn't
definitely.
it,
I,
than
I
just
would say
vehicle.
Tesla is a battery company, not a car company.
What about saying a robot company? Because they are going into the AI and the robotics as
Once
well,
they
aren't they?
release something that they can sell, then I would say they will be a robotics company.
Because they have the Optimus apparently that's on the
Yep,
way,
yep.
isn't it?
They're still working on it, I
I'm
think.
just have Yeah, I'm just looking at that, and that's going to be fairly interesting when that comes out. Production in 2020. Elon Musk has consistently stated intentions to produce thousands of Optimus units in 2025. Recent delays in redesign. However, recent news, early July, indicates, that's now, of course, indicate that Tesla has paused parts procurement and production plans for Optimus. This is due to a reported leadership change and the needs for a redesign to address. So they've run into a few little potholes, so to speak,
Well, it's
with
it's
that
not easy
Optimus.
what they're trying to achieve. If it was easy, you would have seen the DARPA samples of bionic, human-like robots and stuff. The fact that you don't means that it's not something that is very easy to make usable. Yeah.
Yeah. I wonder what it's going to cost. Okay, it'll be very interesting to know what's okay. Okay, this is what the future goal is. The future goal is Tesla's long-term vision for Optimus remains ambitious, with Musk aiming for 50,000 units in 2026 and eventually exceeding 500,000 units annually by 2029. He also still projects a potential price, and I assume it's in US dollars, between $20,000 to $30,000 per robot. That's quite impressive if he's able to deliver that. But he has been promising things in the past, and that when you're an innovator, not everything always goes to script. and sometimes your ambitions are far ahead of what's possible for the engineers and the designers, of course.
Yeah, what's really hard there is you got to try and sort out the fluff, as in what's actually true and what is kind of I guess fluffed up for people to jump on the investing bandwagon, because naturally they need to drum up investment into this venture.
So let's keep on the theme of speculation, and we're going to do this more often because we think it's good fun. One could argue that the closest thing to gold in the crypto world is Bitcoin itself, but there's a lot of fun out there. I don't know if we would call it gambling, but it's certainly out there. Here's a play for you to make you laugh, Peter, today. Which coin do you think has been the biggest increase for this week in terms of price? Dropped a lot, by the way.
Yeah, you know what? With all the meme coins and everything,
Yeah, you're in the right
yeah,
realm. You're in the right realm.
I am completely out of my depth. I would not be able to even fathom what it could
All
be.
right. This is how serious we're getting on the show. The leading one is Bonk Coin. That's correct. Bonk Coin. It actually runs off the Solana network, and followed by Pengu, and one I think you would appreciate, Fart
Yeah,
Coin.
wow.
How about that?
They're good.
Yeah, and good old Trump coin keeps going down, by the way. I know you're a bit of a fan favorite of
A good
the old
old
Trump
Trump
coin.
coin. Buy your
Yes.
piece of Trump election gold, right?
So what's your spin on crypto? We've touched on it. Is it a real fun way of losing money or making money? Because obviously there's those that will say, I remember those people that went into Bitcoin 10 years ago. They're millionaires now. You always hear these stories, of course.
Yeah, and it's like any investment. The best way to approach it is if you treat it as gambling, as in potentially you can lose a considerable amount, especially in crypto, everything. And if you can bear those losses, it's a good thing to gamble in. But if you can't bear to lose, like for example, if you wanted to use it as a superannuation investment, it's not something I would go for, because you can essentially lose everything by going with some of these meme coins.
Yeah.
So it truly is a gamble, and it's a high stakes gamble. So you either go big or you lose everything. Whereas you've got your cryptos like Ethereum and Bitcoin, where they have more stability. While they fluctuate up and down, they might have big rises, big falls. It's still a crypto that's traded and used. And like all currency, at the end of the day, if the currency is traded, it means it's a good currency to use. For example, the Australian dollar is a good currency to always invest into, because it does fluctuate because of how much it gets traded.
Good point. Yeah. So we've dabbled in this space, haven't we? Where's the best way to invest? You're still a big fan, of course, and we're revisiting last episode, real estate. And I want to throw, is that correct in saying that before I get
Look,
into
one
this?
of the main reasons
You're a
why I
big fan.
like real estate is just, I guess, the long term stability. Now, there's always been a saying in life, as safe as houses.
So if you look at real estate, the state of play in terms of real estate, where do you think real estate sits in Australia for our major capital cities in terms of being able to acquire or purchase a place in Sydney? Let's throw a few others, Adelaide or
I think
Perth in
I
terms of
think
Sydney.
our capital cities form the top seven, like part of the top 10 of most difficult places to buy into in the world.
Yeah, it certainly is up there. For Sydney, you have obviously, sorry, excuse me, for Australia, Sydney leads the pack relative to the world. Okay, obviously you have Sydney followed by Brisbane, Canberra, and Adelaide. But if you look at relative to the world where we sit, Australia's position demographics from 2025 has highlighted Australia as the second most expensive nation for housing, only behind
Yeah.
Hong Kong. Does that
No,
surprise
it
you?
doesn't. When you consider how densely populated Hong Kong is, because it is a limited stretch of land, and especially how unique Hong Kong is in terms of being, I guess, the gateway to China for a lot of Western nations, there is a lot of demand for Hong Kong.
Mm.
When you compare that to what we Australia, we got acres of land everywhere you turn. I mean, the easiest way that, go for a drive 2 hours out of Sydney, you're going to see land everywhere that's taken up by farmlands, and people are owning 300, 400 acres of land. Not everyone, but there's people that have that. you know, come back to Sydney, you're lucky if people have an acre of land.
Now, looking at in terms of the reasons, if you delve deep into Australia's problem, for our young listeners who are frustrated when they hear these type of numbers being branded about, just to give them a little bit of insight into why we like this. Part of the problem is we have a rapid population growth in Australia, believe it or not, because of the influx of people. It's creating an intense demand for housing. There is, believe it or not, a supply shortage because if you look at the land scarcity and geographic constraints, excuse me, cities like Sydney and Melbourne, they are constrained by oceans and mountains and national parks. It limits the outward expansion and development
And one
of
thing I will
lands.
add, a lot of those national parks are not land that can be rezoned anytime soon.
That's
And
right.
part of the reason is they form the basins for where our fresh water is gained. So you can't just say, oh, why don't we just use the national park? No, it's actually being used for reservoirs, so we can have, drinking water.
Now, other problems we have, of course, is high construction costs. It is actually something interesting about Australia. But other aspects to consider, the investment impact. Remember, there are tax incentives in Australia. We do have something that we hope a lot of people, when I say we, people that own investment properties, don't want touching, which is, of course, the negative gearing. Okay, that is a generous tax concession, allowing investors. Now, this is for you young people out there to think about. It allows investors to deduct property expenses against your taxable income, even if the property is making a loss. And of course, you have in Australia a 50% capital gains tax discount on profits from selling investment properties held for over a year. Now, there is other factors, of course, that we could go into. We could go into the fact we do have high average and minimum wages. Believe it or not, we rank seventh globally for average wages in a recent study in the world. And Australia does have a strong economic growth. So the outlook in Australia, as much as we may feel when we go to get that packet of blueberries at the supermarket and go, why are they $8 or $9 now? We are doing a lot better than a lot of other countries in terms of our economic growth. Maybe not what we're paying in the groceries. We see that going up in inflation, of course. But there's some of the variables. What do you think of that, Peter? That list? Does that touch on why we like this? Does that account
That
for
is
it?
the major reasons why we are in this position where we are, like as a, I guess, as people today. And one of the biggest, I guess, differences is when you look at New Zealand, the way that they've done theirs, they don't have concessions for negative gearing. Sorry, I'm not sure if it's negative gearing, but definitely the discounts for capital gains, they don't have that in New Zealand because their I guess policy around housing, especially more of late, has not been around making that much of a profit on real estate investment or at least residential investment.
So when we talk about the discount for capital gains in Australia, how does that work? So you own a place for more than a year, you're not going to be paying 50%. Is that correct? Of on the profit,
That's
if it
correct.
or that's what we mean by
Bas
capital gains. So what are you going to be paying?
So
What are you going to be paying?
let's just say you make a profit of $100,000 after you sell
Mm-hmm.
a house after you've owned it for a year. Your taxable income straight away is halved, and the tax that you have to pay is only on that 50,000 rather than the 100,000.
Really? So it's half. That makes sense. That was really good for our listeners. I like how you use that number, 100,000. So just to reiterate it, because I don't think I've ever heard it explained that well out there. So let's use a nice number that Peter's thrown there. A profit of 100,000. That means that 50,000, half of it. So if it was 200,000, it'd be 100,000. Half of it would then be taxed. So in other words, that's what gets added to your taxable income. Is that correct?
Yeah,
And
that is
then
correct. And
taxed.
then you're taxed based on your collective taxable income as a whole. Now, here's where it becomes interesting, where some people wouldn't know. Now, if you had a property as your primary residence, right?
No capital
No, no, no,
gains.
no. But
Yeah.
yeah, that's correct. But let me just go on even further. right? You can move out of that property for 6 years, rent it out, or for up to 6 years, rent it out, sell it before the end of the 6 years, and still you will not pay any capital gains.
Wow, that's a beauty. Hey, is there a loophole if someone wants to do this? I don't want to be in trouble and police arrive at my front door here, but what would stop someone, okay, selling their primary, let's say they're at that age, they can see the sun set and they want to retire. Okay, they have their primary place, okay, they sell that, they have an investment property, they live in that investment property for a little while, and then they sell that because that becomes their primary residence, and then they buy a place somewhere else. Can
There's
they do
nothing
that?
wrong in doing it. I think, though, there is a requirement that you have to live in the investment property and obviously have proof that you've been living in there for,
Yeah,
I'm not sure
yeah.
if it's 6 to 12 months. Yeah,
Okay, that's fair enough. That's
yeah,
fair, isn't it? Okay, so you can do a bit of a leapfrog thing as you're
yeah,
going
yeah,
along. Well, okay, there's an idea for our retirees.
yeah. And look,
They might not help their children, but
and based on that though, like especially when it comes to primary residence, there's a lot of things that I've heard people do that it's not accurate or not in the best spirit of things. But hey, I'm not going to say it on here because it's not
yeah,
something that I want to encourage
you're going to
anyone to
be
do
encouraging. Yeah,
or get that
exactly.
idea like that. If you were found out doing that, that's I
Good
believe
luck.
that's a jailable offense because it's
Yeah.
considered fraud.
Yes, so
So
it should be.
yeah,
But it's unfair as well. And I find it interesting in terms of real estate prices. Are we maybe needing to look at now? We are using the government's using that vernacular, affordable housing. I think of Singapore. That's a beautiful place to visit. A very expensive city to live in. So they have a dominant public housing system there. It plays a central role in Singapore housing landscape, developing and managing around 77 to 80% of the housing stock. Now, I'm led to believe that it's a 99-year leasehold. So while citizens own their flats, obviously when they pay it off, they do so on a 99-year leasehold basis. The land itself is owned by the government.
it's kind of similar to how it is here though as well. The only difference here is when you pass away, that leasehold kind of goes on to the next person and kind of reapplies itself.
Mm,
And also, if you're still alive after that period, so let's say for argument's sake, you have good genetics and you live to 130 and you bought your house when you're 20, it stays with you while you're alive. And the reason why I say that, especially in Australia, is because the Crown does have the right to repossess land at its wish when it wants to.
that's interesting whether we're going to be going that way,
Yeah.
possibly in Australia, now that I'm hearing that language of affordable housing being thrown around.
You know what? It's not a bad approach. People need homes. Me personally, I would love to see the government actually take charge and take leadership and start developing some high density dwellings. So that way, then we have one quality construction, and then number two, these are dwellings that people are buying with government assistance or without, but affordable, and that all remains as part of the government. I don't see an issue with that.
And they're trying to help. They do have the home guarantee scheme, the HDS. And the way it works is the government guarantees a portion of the loan, allowing lenders to approve loans with as little as 5% deposit instead of your typical, obviously, 20, 30%, whatever it's been. And on top of that, there's some guarantees, first home guarantee, 35,000 places for eligible first home buyers. That's from July the 1st, 2025 to the 30th of
Yeah,
2026.
that's a scary bill or I guess a scheme. The reason why I say that is if you don't have skin in the game, by that I mean you haven't saved for a deposit for the house
Mm.
that you're living in, you are less likely to continue to pay it off if you start experiencing stress in paying
You
it
lose your
off.
job. What happens there? You lose your job. What happens there for a little short
Yeah,
time?
if you it's a good example that's similar to what happened in the US during the financial crisis is people started becoming stressed in terms of paying off their mortgage, but because they had zero down, they could walk away. They've not put anything in besides what they've been paying off, and they can walk away with no with little repercussions in comparison to what they've done.
It's funny, there's a lot of other initiatives the government is trying. They are truly trying because when you look at obviously stamp duty, another area, a tax, if you want to call it, that you normally pay. It's a state tax, correct me if I'm wrong. In New South Wales, it's full exemption on new or existing homes up to 800,000, concessional rates up to 1 million. That's for first home buyers. I didn't get that, Peter. That's good.
Yeah,
That's good.
it is. It is.
They're doing
I
that.
did. Well, I was able to take advantage of that. Back in I won't say the year, but back when it first came, the first home buyer grants came out and all that. I was able to take advantage of the grants and getting, I guess, stamp duty wiped off. I mean, granted, the stamp duty is nowhere near of what it was that is instead of being 200,000 for some houses, the stamp duty. I paid hardly anything. So a bit different, big different times at the moment.
So, what do you think for young people? Okay, we've established their Gen X that are
You
now
mean Gen
in the
Z?
game. Gen Z,
Yes.
Gen Z, Gen Z, Gen Z. Okay, what are they going to do? Should they be doing the old, what seems to be living at home, getting themselves a small unit, investment property, negative gear it, and save away, then get married later in life at 32, 33, and then consider if they do want to have children, then go from there, and then buy a place, or should they buy their first home and live in it as soon as they can?
It really comes down to how well you can tolerate living at home. Um, living at home is great in terms of your hip pocket because there is so much that parents, I guess, look after their children for. So food, bills, things like that. Generally parents take care of. That is a massive help. But there is the other side of there are other people that you need to consider when you're living with them. So, and especially them being parents, there is some level of respect that you always have to show your parents because you are living and eating their food and living in their home.
Very
Yes.
interesting, isn't it? It's not that straightforward, but there are options. That's all
Definitely,
we're saying.
definitely, there are options, and like going back to further answer your question, I would say if you can tolerate living with your parents, do so as long as you can. Buy whatever you can as soon as you can, and yeah, just pay that down as best as you can because that gives you equity in the game. Even if you look at, say, for example, units where generally they don't have the same level of, I guess, increase as a house, a unit still gives you equity that allows you to borrow against when you're going for your next home. So
Yeah.
there's no wrong move when it comes to property at this stage. Anyway.
Unlike crypto, where you could end up with fart coin doing all right and then overnight dropping down the good old classic pump
Yeah,
and
yeah.
dump, your
Yeah,
photo
but like
very
even at the
recently.
start, like while you're saving for, your deposits, I would say, if you're fresh out of school, so you've, just finished university, and started your first gig, or come straight out of school and you're finishing your apprenticeship, so where potentially you're going to start earning some serious money. Or as I like to call it, adult money. That's the time where you sit down and you go, okay, I want to. Buy a house. How am I going to save? Okay, you start saving that $1,000 a week, like I said, sorry, a month, as I said, as a minimum, and you start investing that straight away into an ETF, like you mentioned last time. And I think they're a good way as well, personally, to start off with, because it gives you that continual growth, and plus you're continually investing into it as well.
Mm. Lots of thoughts and lots of
Yeah.
options, but don't keep your money under the
Oh
mattress.
yeah,
That's what.
definitely don't keep it under the mattress. No way. Unless you like going backwards, then
That's it. That's right. Even keeping in the bank is worthwhile. We said it's very conservative, but you are getting some interest, and the power of compound interest can work in your favour. That is another option, believe it or not, if you're very concerned and you're worried about investing in shares and other areas. But as you pointed out, Peter, if you study the history, it always seems to be the case. If you start off young enough, property will go up inevitably.
Yeah.
What a great episode, Peter. Anything to finish on?
No, we covered quite a lot here. It's been a good episode.
I think so. So on that note, my name is Robert.
Peter.
And he is